So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case. Today we're going to be talking about a very highly requested case. Today's case is one that actually went viral on TikTok. A lot of you guys have been seeing TikToks about this particular girl, this murderer, and you guys wanted me to cover it in more detail, which is exactly what I'm here to do. But there are a lot of TikToks of people recreating this girl's court appearances, like duetting and dressing up like a convict and pretending to be her, which is so odd. And comment sections on TikToks about this girl are full of things like, oh my god, she's so pretty, like whoever she killed, they must have deserved it. Like, it's disgusting. And so I'm here today to kind of strip all of the glamour, or the glamour that was put there by TikTok. I'm here to strip all of that away, and I'm going to keep this 100. This is a real tragedy that took a real human life. Someone's loved one died at the hands of this disgusting monster. One thing about this case though is that there's not really that much information out there. I've done my best, but this is probably one of my shortest videos ever because I struggled. The family have been quite private about this case, and you'll see why, because it's harrowing. But before we get into this video, I just want to thank our sponsors for making this video possible, Raid Shadow Legends. Whether it's badass champions, tough bosses, millions of players, regular updates, whatever you look for in a game, Raid Shadow Legends has it all. Raid Shadow Legends is an amazing RPG game with sick graphics, free to download on your PC or mobile right now using the link down below in the description of this video. You get to pick and customize your champion. Mine's this guy right here, super cool, big scary man, and you can battle it out either against AI or other live players in order to upgrade your champion and become the most powerful you can be. And this month, Raid just released their biggest update ever with the main event, the Doom Tower. There's a bunch of secret challenge rooms, badass bosses to take on, and even more battling to do. Plus 14 brand new champions specially released for the holidays, along with a whole host of holiday events and tournaments. And Raid have a bunch of presents ready for players this holiday season. Here are some champions: Sir Nicholas, Rainbeast, and Frostbringer putting the presents under the tree. They're giving away a bunch of free goodies, plus a super special champion to help you get started in the tower. His name is Bulwark. He's amazing in Clan Boss. So if you want to get a head start with Raid, the link to download for free right now is in the description of this video. Go click it. And if you join right now, you will get a series of welcome bonuses, welcome gifts from Raid Shadow Legends, including your Void Champion, Bulwark, absolutely free, plus 50 gems, plus an XP booster, some energy refills, and even an ancient shard. All waiting for you right here once you get in the game. You can find me in-game under the name Eleanor Neale, and if you quick, you might even be able to join my clan. So download using the link down below in the description, and I'll see you there. Thanks again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into it. But before we do, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So today we're going to be talking about Isabella Guzman, or Guzman, I'm probably going to call it Guzman, an 18-year-old girl who lived with her mother and stepfather in Aurora, Colorado. Isabella had quite an unremarkable school life. She didn't have amazingly high grades. She had no major career aspirations. I don't know, not like she was failing and she had a bad school life, but there was nothing really significant about her. There was nothing for me to sit here and kind of figure up over. Isabella had a troubled relationship with her biological parents ever since she was very young. She would always misbehave. She was like a trouble child. Her parents eventually divorced, and Isabella was to stay with her mother, Yuni. However, that didn't last very long. When she was 7 years old, her behaviour was actually that bad that her mother sent her to live with her father, Richard. Now, I don't know how a 7-year-old's behaviour can be so bad that you can't live with it, but Isabella's was. Yuni just couldn't handle her own daughter, and so Isabella went to live with her father for a while, and then eventually she came back home, but nothing had really changed, you know. She moved back in with her mother and she was still that same mischievous child. And she just didn't have a great relationship with her mother either. We'll talk more about that in a second. Her biological parents actually still worked together at the time. So when Isabella was still very, very young, her mother and father bought a studio together. I think they were both artists. They bought this studio when they were married, and then when they divorced, they couldn't really afford to leave the job that they were in. So they didn't. They still worked together. They were on good terms. They were both super passionate about this job. And when Isabella was younger, she often went and helped out at the studio studio. She would work there after school, but she didn't like it. She didn't like spending any more time with her parents than she needed to. She didn't like her family. She was just a very antisocial person in general. And Isabella hated that her mother stayed in this job because it wasn't very well paying at all. And Isabella despised her mother for being poor. You see this a lot with children, not that they despise their parents, but they kind of resent their parents for putting them in kind of a poor life. They're like, why can't I be like the other kids that can afford this, this and that? Like, they don't fully understand that it's not a choice until they're older. When kids are like 10 years old, all they know is that other kids have good stuff. They have the expensive clothes and new games and stuff, and they don't. And they blame that on their parents for having a low income job. However, Isabella just never broke out of that point of view. Normally, as kids get older, they realise that it's not their parents' fault, and their parents actually did everything they possibly could to give them those good things. They just couldn't afford them. However, Isabella just remained ungrateful and just angry about everything when she was older. Over the years, her mischievous, bad behaviour, she would have tantrums, all of that when she was younger. But as she was getting older and into her teenage years, this translated into something much more serious. She stopped going to school, her attendance was so bad, and then eventually she just dropped out altogether right before her final exams, which her parents were so disappointed in her for doing. They understood that school was not for Isabella. She wasn't gelling with the school system at all. But they were so upset with her for not even just sticking it out and not even just completing the exams and then being like, wow, I hated that. The fact that she dropped out just before her exams and missed out on qualifications, her family didn't like that. She stopped hanging around her family more and more. Like, as a child, she tried to spend as little time with them as possible, but as she was a teenager, the only time she would ever see her parents or her mother was to have an argument with her. Many of these arguments would stem from Isabella sneaking boys into the home. So she would invite boys over and let them in the back door, and then when they left, they would climb out of her bedroom window and run across the garden and jump the fence at the end of the garden. And almost every single time, her mother, Yuni, would see these boys jumping over the fence in her garden. However, that was only one little part of it. It was Isabella disrespecting their home and her mother's rules, but that was only one small part of it. Like I said, there's not much out there on this case, but the way that family and friends describe Isabella and Yunmi's relationship, it was as though Yuni was giving Isabella everything she possibly could with her low-income job, her very little time at home. She had to work long hours, but she tried so hard with Isabella, and Isabella was just ungrateful and horrible to her mother. Isabella also hated the fact that her mother had remarried after her father. So like I said, they divorced when Isabella was still very, very young, and her mother got a new boyfriend named Yuni Hoy. They were actually married. He was a boyfriend and then they got married, so her name was Yuni Hoy. And Isabella hated that her father was replaced, which also meant that she hated her new stepfather, Yuni Hoy, because he was the replacement. And she would get into serious arguments with Yuni and Ryan. And these arguments would get so severe that she would resort to borderline physical violence, or maybe this is actually physical violence, but she would spit on her mother. I don't know if she would punch her, hit her, kick her, anything like that, but I know that she would spit on her quite often, which is so disrespectful. And then it got to the point where she actually began sending her mother threatening texts and emails, just saying that her mother was going to pay for treating her like this one day. Isabella would constantly make violent threats towards her mother, and Yuni was scared. She was terrified of her own daughter. She knew that Isabella wasn't giving hollow threats. She knew that Isabella would act on these threats. And she actually once called the police on Isabella after these violent threats because she genuinely believed that she was going to follow through with them. She never did, but who knows, maybe she would have if the police hadn't got involved. However, Isabella tells her childhood story much differently to this. So this is all from sources from friends and family and stuff, whereas Isabella says that her upbringing was very different to that. Isabella says that she was abused in the home since she was around 9 or 10 years old. Her parents, I believe her mother and stepfather, were both Jehovah's Witnesses, and I think her father before that, Richard, was also a Jehovah's Witness, which is a branch of Christianity, I believe. And so Isabella was raised Jehovah's Witness until she was around 14 14 years old when she began to, you know, push it away. She decided that this religion just wasn't for her. It wasn't working for her. This wasn't her views. Her views didn't align with this religion. And she told her parents that she no longer wanted to be a Jehovah's Witness. She no longer wanted to go to church with them, anything like that. And Isabella said from that moment, the abuse worsened. Now, this is just what Isabella has said in court. And I don't want to sit here on this video and say that she's lying. I never want to do that about anyone. But there are 0 sources that can confirm that this happened. A lot of sources say that this is what Isabella said, and like I said, I don't want to sit here and say that she's lying, but no family, no friends, no one is able to confirm this. There's no sources that mention that this is a true fact. People believe that this is a story that she came up with to gain some sympathy and maybe get a smaller sentence in prison later on. Maybe to help pinpoint some psychological issues to help her kind of feign insanity. Because that is where a lot of psychological mental health issues begin, is in the childhood through abuse and things like that. So a lot of people seem to think, well, she didn't mention it up until she was in court, and then as soon as she knew that she could potentially get an insanity plea, that was when all of a sudden she had all these psychological issues stemming back to her childhood. I think the abuse storyline is something that TikTok comment sections heard. They didn't fact check and they just ran with it. So a lot of TikTok comment sections will be like, oh, this girl was abused, like that was her reason for doing it. However, I think it's all just hearsay. There's no actual official articles that state that she was abused, or at least any that I could find. On August 28th, 2013, Isabella Guzman's stepfather, Ryan Hoy, called the police and informed them of another incident that had happened between Isabella and her mother. This was another one of Isabella's threatening texts or emails. However, it had followed a very serious argument, and then Isabella had gone to her bedroom that night and written her mother an email telling her that she was going to pay for what she'd said and done to her that night. Her actual words were that she was gonna make up for what she'd done. And since the family were terrified of Isabella and they were aware that she wasn't scared to act on her threats, they decided to call the police. Her mother, Yuni, had also gotten in contact with Isabella's biological father, Richard, and asked him to come down to the house and have a word with Isabella, because Yuni just couldn't put up with Isabella anymore. And she thought that hopefully her father, that she barely sees, would be able to talk some sense into her. So Richard came down to the house. He took Isabella out into the back garden and they sat down for well over an hour just discussing everything. Her relationship with her mother, what needed to change, how people were feeling. And he just told her, like, look, you're 18 now. You're old enough to live by yourself, and your mother has every legal right to kick you out of the house and make you homeless. Like, if you don't follow your mother's rules, she can do that, and she's very close to doing that. The two of them spoke for well over an hour about everything, and Richard left that conversation with Isabella feeling as though she was going to make some positive changes. He thought he'd finally gotten through to her. He said that the two of them were just sat in the garden, they were watching nature, watching all the birds and the trees, and like, he felt that that was a really nice moment with his daughter. One of the first nice moments he'd had with his daughter in so long. He felt like he saw a good person behind Isabella. And he thought that that was the last of the issues that they were going to have, and they were going to move on from that point and things were going to get better, the family were going to get closer, but he couldn't have been more wrong. This was actually all an act on Isabella's front, and inside her head, the whole time she was having that conversation with her father saying that she was going to change, she was going to do things differently, she was actually just planning her next move. And it would only be a matter of hours until she put that next move into motion. That evening, Isabella Guzman spent the rest of her night in her bedroom, which was what she did pretty much every single night because she didn't like speaking to her family. Around 9 p.m. that night, Yuni told her husband Ryan that she was going to go up for a shower. She'd been working all day, she was going to have a shower, and then they were going to go to bed. So Ryan said, okay, you go up and have a shower, and then when you're done, I'll meet you in bed, and then they'll go to bed. So Ryan's downstairs in the living room, he's watching TV, whatever, and he hears the shower turn on, and he's like, right, okay, everything's fine. And then he hears a thud coming from upstairs, and then a whole lot of commotion followed. He heard banging, muffled yelling and screams, so he jumped up and ran up the stairs to see the bathroom door slam shut in his face. He only caught it for a split second, but in that split second he saw Isabella Guzman slamming the door of the bathroom with her and her mother still inside, alone. Ryan struggled with her to get the door open, but Isabella was too strong and she fully overpowered him and locked the door so he couldn't get in. He's shouting and screaming at her from the outside, telling her to stop what she's doing, to leave her mother alone, but she keeps going, and all he can hear is repeated thuds and bangs banging and screaming, muffled screaming. He can hear his wife Yuni calling his name, calling out for him, and all he could do was run downstairs, grab his phone and start calling 911. When he finally got back up the stairs, the screams were dying down and he was on the phone to 911 when he saw a pool of blood slowly start leaking out from under the bathroom door. And then he heard his wife mutter what would be her last words: Jehovah, which means God. And then there was silence. All the bangs stopped, the screams stopped. At this point, he's still on the phone to 911 and he's panicked, he's terrified, he's horrified, he's scared not only for his own life, but also he's traumatized after hearing the love of his life calling out from the other side of a door to come and save her, and he couldn't. And he just listened to her die. Listen to her get brutally murdered. And then all of a sudden, the bathroom door unlocked and swung open, and he looked over and there was 18-year-old Isabella Guzman standing in the doorway, covered in blood. She was wearing a pink sports bra, blue shorts, covered in blood, still holding the knife in her hand, which was still dripping. Ryan froze still for a second, thinking that he was about to be her next target. But all she did was look straight ahead. She didn't look at him once, she didn't mutter a word, and she just walked past him and walked downstairs. He said it was so weird because there wasn't even a sinister, evil look on her face. It was just Isabella. It was like nothing had ever happened. It was like she literally just walked out of the bathroom after having a shower. And that's what's so eerie about this, is that she was totally unaffected, totally unfazed by what she'd just done to the woman that gave her life. Ryan ran into the bathroom to try to do whatever he could to help Yuni. However, at that point, she was laying there naked and just covered in blood. He tried to do CPR, chest compressions, everything, but she was just staring blankly ahead, and he could tell that she was already gone. Like I said, there was blood everywhere and she was barely recognizable. Most of the wounds that she'd endured during that attack had been to her face and neck. The autopsy found that Yuni Hoy had been stabbed a total of 79 times. 79 repeated motions. That's how you can tell that this is a frenzied attack with pure emotion, pure anger, pure rage. That even when Isabella's arm got tired, she had so much adrenaline in her body, so much rage, so much emotion that she kept going through the pain. Her arm would have been sore at that point, but she didn't care. She wanted to inflict more and more pain on her mother. For someone's arm to keep going even when they're getting tired shows that their emotions are still so strong. Now, some sources claim that this total stab wound number is 151 as opposed to 79. And I saw 151 on a lot of the TikToks and a lot of the, tweets and things like that. However, the official kind of articles and sources and the most that I could fact check it, I think it is 79. There is a lot of stuff in this case that is sensationalized. Obviously, with it being on TikTok, a lot of people get hold of it and they kind of retell it in their own way. They want to make it sound more horrifying, like a horror movie. And I think it is enough in itself without having to double the amount of stab wounds. This is a horrifying case. However, the most credible that I have found is that there were 79 stab wounds. 31 of those were to the face and 48 of them in the neck region. So Isabella was going for her mother's face. But when people are going for the face and kind of this region, this is the most unique part of a person, is their face, isn't it? It's what you can tell people apart with. And that's how you can tell that this is so personal. Isabella wasn't killing just because she wanted to kill. She was killing because she wanted to kill her mother specifically. She wanted to see her mother's face as she was doing this to her. And you can imagine that her mother was, 79 stab wounds in just this general area. You can imagine that she was more wound than skin by the end of it. The main injuries were stab wounds with the same knife. However, there were multiple injuries to the rest of Yuni's body that were done with a baseball bat. Isabella had beaten her mother's body. Now, I don't know if this was before, during, or after her mother died. Some sources seem to think it was afterwards, she finished the attack with the baseball bat, but I'm not 100% sure. And that could possibly be where the 151 injuries comes from. It's not 151 stab wounds. It could potentially be 151 total injuries, which could include self-defense wounds or bruises or scrapes or anything like that. And I think the two different methods of causing injury shows that Isabella didn't care how she did it, but she knew that she wanted to kill her mother, she wanted to inflict pain on her mother, and she wanted to enjoy it. She wanted to do this for as long as she could. She wanted to drag it out and she wanted it to be personal. She wanted to look her mother in the eyes as she did this. Meanwhile, Isabella had fled the house at this point, and police and an ambulance were arriving, and Ryan, of course, because he watched Isabella close the door, close her mum inside the bathroom, and then he watched her walk out of the bathroom, he could tell police exactly who had done this to Yuni. So a search team was sent out to find Isabella because she could be anywhere right now, and bear in mind she still had the knife. She could still be in some kind of psychological episode, whatever she was in at the time that she killed her mother. She was a potential danger to plenty of others, to so many other people, just walking around in this unstable state of mind with a weapon. Even though this was a very personal attack on her mother, who knows, that could have been the catalyst, but then she could have gone out on a murderous rampage. Police knew that they needed to find her fast, and so they put her name and her face on every single news outlet that they possibly could. And the following morning, police actually received a phone call saying that someone had discovered what they believe could have possibly been a dead body in a car park, in like a parking garage. However, when police arrived, there was no body, but they did find Isabella Guzman asleep in her car, which is what they believe that this person thought was a dead body. Bear in mind, Isabella was still covered in blood. She didn't take a change of clothes with her, so she's still in her blood-soaked sports bra and short, asleep in a car. Of course people are going to think that's a dead body. So Isabella was arrested in that parking garage. She didn't put up a fight, she didn't protest, she went pretty easily. Police say that they found a bunch of evidence both in the car and also just in the general parking garage, which I don't actually know what that was. I couldn't find what that was, whether that was the knife or her clothes or maybe something that she brought from home. So at first, she wasn't actually taken to the police station straight away. She was taken to a hospital because, of course, she was covered in blood, but she'd also sustained a few injuries from the attack herself. She had a few cuts on her hands, potentially from where her hand had slipped with the knife in it. Of course, when her mother started bleeding, things were going to get slippery, and maybe she kind of slipped and grabbed hold of the blade and this cut open her hand. She had a few injuries that needed stitching up. She still has scars of those injuries now. I do think these were accidental wounds that Isabella gave herself. I don't think that Yuni was ever really able to defend herself that much, so I don't think it's wounds that Yuni was able to give her. I do think these were just genuine accidental kind of slip wounds where she'd grabbed the blade or something like that. But once she was all stitched up and looked at and taken care of, she was sent to the police station for questioning. But not just for an interview and police questioning, she was also given a psychiatric evaluation because this was unlike anything that Colorado police had seen in a while. It's clear that any human being capable of such a vicious attack on someone that they're supposed to love, they must have some level of, psychological issues or mental health issues, mental illness. This evaluation came back and Isabella Guzman was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She'd been having delusions, both audio and visual, so she was seeing things and hearing things for years leading up until this point. She would also hear voices, which I know is a very stereotypical symptom of schizophrenia, but it's stereotypical for a reason, and that's because a lot of people do genuinely suffer with it. A lot of people with schizophrenia don't hear voices, but for Isabella, that is how it manifested, and she would hear people telling her what to do and that she needed to kill someone. She believed that her mother was actually a woman named Cecilia that she had to kill in order to save the world. Cecilia was an evil being, and Isabella had to kill Cecilia in order to save the rest of the world, and that is what she was told by these voices in her head. She would see things, she would see people coming to speak to her about Cecilia. Of course, none of this was real. Her mother was not a woman named Cecilia. So Isabella Guzman's court appearances are what made her and this case so famous, so viral. It was the way that this girl acted in court. It was just so eerie. She was smiling, but not even like a genuine psychotic smile that some killers do in court. It was like a sarcastic smile at the cameras. There seemed like there was anger behind it. She would communicate with the cameras. I don't actually know what she's trying to say here, either stop watching or showing that she's not crying or something like that. And it's clips from these court appearances that were posted all over TikTok that have gained Isabella like a sick fan base in a way. There are people that are recreating these court appearances, people that are, putting music behind them and making fan edits. There was one particular TikTok that got a lot of attention that had Ava Max's Sweet But Psycho song behind it. People calling this girl Sweet But Psycho, which I just think people on the internet tend to forget that these are real cases, real tragedies, and real lives were lost. A whole family lost a woman that meant a lot to them that night. Imagine how it would feel to lose one of your loved ones and then go on TikTok and see millions of people celebrating and idolizing and making fan edits of the person that murdered your loved one. Anyway, moving on, because I could rant about that for a while. Now, in Isabella's trial, if she was found guilty, she could potentially be put up for the death penalty. Since she was 18, she's an adult. However, right before her plea, her defense team decided to take the very expected approach of pleading insanity. So Isabella said that she was not guilty because she is not mentally sound. She has, you know, serious mental illness. She said that she was in a completely different psychological state when she killed her mother. She's actually since said that she hates that she did that. She looks at that girl, that 18-year-old girl that killed her mother, and she says that she doesn't even recognize that as her. So her plea was accepted and she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. However, because of that insanity plea, she was sentenced to an indefinite amount of time in a psychiatric facility. So that means she's going to be put in a psychiatric hospital and she can be kept there potentially for the rest of her life until the professional psychiatrists determine her better. So she's currently in the Colorado Mental Health Institute and she will be potentially for the rest of her life. She's actually tried to appeal this a couple of times. She believes that she is ready to integrate back into society. She's been on medication for a long time. She's 25 years old now and she believes that she's ready to get back out there and she's not the same person that she was when she was 18 years old. However, I think it'll be unlikely that she'll be let out of a psychiatric facility for a long time, just because she is only that way. She has only changed in her head due to her medication, and once they let her free from that hospital, there's no guaranteeing that she's going to take her medication, and if she doesn't, then that might put her back in the old mental state that meant that she murdered her mother. Who knows what else she could be capable of. So I'm not 100% sure how this is actually going to go. I don't know if they're going to trust her to take her medication one day and let her free, or if she's going to be in this hospital for a lot of her adult life. But that is all I have on this case today. Quite a short one, like I said, but thank you so much for watching anyway. Thank you to everyone that requested this case. If you have any more case requests for me, I am always checking the comments on every single video and I do take all of your requests in. I have a little list of cases to cover. Thanks again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. If you want to download the game, you can go through the link down below in the description and receive a bunch of welcome presents from Raid, including a free Void Champion, plus 50 gems, an XP booster, some energy refills, and even an ancient shard. But you have to be quick, so download using the link down below in the description. Huge thank you to all of my channel members for helping me decide the cases that I cover, especially my tier 2 members whose names are all on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, you can just click the join button on a desktop, or there'll be a link in the description of this video. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you want to subscribe, there's a link to do so right here. If you want to subscribe to my brand new second channel, there's a link right here. And if you want to watch another video, there'll be a playlist on screen right here. Bye!